Welcome back to the ExEm podcast. Here is your host, licensed mental health therapist, Matthew Knabe.
So, trauma is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot and is often misinterpreted or even downplayed. At the ExEm podcast, we desire to educate and connect some of the dots around what this term means and how it could be affecting you. You have heard from Victoria Gutbrod before in season 1, and she will be joining me in several episodes this year and probably beyond with a series that we begin today called Trauma Talk. Victoria and I will discuss different aspects of trauma and possibly tie in some notable characters in Scripture to further our discussions in these episodes. So let's get to it. Here's our first episode of Trauma Talk. So Victoria, thank you so much for being on this podcast today. This is going to be a little different. This isn't our normal ExEm podcast interview. This is actually you and I are going to have a little conversation that we've kind of had in the works for a while. We kind of teased it a little bit in our last episode, but this is essentially the first episode from the ExEm podcast that is going to be focused on our thing called Trauma Talk, which we're going to get into. But what I'd like for you to do just for a minute, talk to us a little bit about the Trauma Center, a little bit about what Emerge is doing in 2021 around your new role and what that's going to kind of look like moving forward and where we're at, what stage we're at with that in the process.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I'm so excited to be able to share some airwaves with you and to have a dialogue about something we're both really passionate about is coming alongside survivors who are hungry for wholeness and healing. And the Trauma Center is something that is kind of got birthed inside of many people and through just a culmination of a lot of passion, shared passion for really developing a hub, a center where individuals who are either experiencing trauma or therapists or ministry leaders who want to know more about how to understand trauma can come to so that they can gain information or connect to a therapist. It's kind of exciting because we are focusing on coming alongside those who are wounded and impacted by the many ways that trauma can leave a residue on someone's life. And so there's the spiritual component, there's the physical component, the mental component, the mind. And so we're incorporating all of these aspects into this amazing work we're doing. And it's really, like I said, a culmination of many people's passion and desire to move this train, if you will, forward.
And so what are your thoughts about like in 2021? I mean, we're relatively early still in the year. What are your thoughts about what this is going to look like 6 months from now, 8 months from now?
We're hoping within the next 6 months that we will be able to provide so many more resources, so many more touch points for our listeners, for those who are clients, for those who are in community, who are desiring education, who are desiring healing, who are desiring to be able to focus on that concept of trauma. So we're continuing to look at it almost like a three-pronged approach. There'll be the educational component of it, there'll be the physical component of it, and then there will be the integration of the spiritual component of healing. Because let's just face it, Matt, Jesus loved the traumatized.
Yeah.
I mean, can you find a story in the Bible that he's not sitting with someone who's in some form of trauma?
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me right into what we're going to be doing today. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the things that you and I've been talking about over the last couple months about developing a little bit of a conversation that we're going to do quarterly that was named Trauma Talk. And, this birthed out of a conversation you and I had a year ago, which was I think it was the third podcast that we did on the ExEm podcast.
Around this time last year, almost.
Exactly.
To date.
Yeah. And what a weird time that was. I mean, there was such a transition that we all experienced going through that. And here we are a year later, and we've got this kind of new idea that we're going to be doing. So I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about what you and I have been working on as far as what Trauma Talk will be. And, just kind of give our audience a little bit of understanding of what we're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Yeah. Matt and I are going to be participating in a quarterly talk on just various aspects of trauma, however the spirit moves us in that season. There'll be some follow-up materials. There's going to be a blog called Trauma Talk, and there's going to be other touch points on our website as we continue to launch it and develop it for this conversation. So I'm excited because in this particular podcast, I get to turn the tables a little bit on you. And so not only are you the one asking questions, but you will be the one answering some of my questions. Some of my curiosity will get to be explored with you.
Yeah. I think it's a really neat idea. And, for those who don't and haven't been to the website, go to emerge.org. That's where we're going to start building all of these materials and different resources around the topics that we're going to be discussing. So right now, we're going to go into a conversation and we're going to talk about an area of trauma today. And this is something that you and I have kind of discussed before we started recording, but we want to kind of leave it open just to have a conversation around connectivity and safety. And I'd like to allow you to kind of talk to the audience a little bit about what you've shared with me about what that means in the context of trauma. What is connectivity? What does safety mean as far as this topic goes?
So if you look at it under trauma-informed care embodies two concepts of connectivity and safety. So those are two major principles in being trauma-informed in anything that we do. And so what does connection mean? What does safety mean? Well, then let's take it to the spiritual level. Let's take it to the relational level. Let's look at it from a physical level. So I want to challenge you and I to explore the different ways that we are impacted in the last year with COVID and with everything that's happened to us relationally, with connection, with safety. So I'm curious, Matt, if you could explore a little bit with us how when I use the word connection, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in your current world with connectivity?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that immediately comes to my mind is the idea that I don't know how important that was until maybe 2020 hit and connectivity was severed. And so I think, for me, even as a therapist, you take some of that for granted until last year hit. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the relationships that are really important to me were essentially physically severed. And, I shared with you, and I'll self-disclose and be honest with our audience.
And that's what we want. That's what
right.
We want.
That's what we're doing. And I think I've shared this on the podcast before. I have a daughter who is immune compromised. And, when the pandemic happened, we were made very aware by our doctors and several of them, in fact, that she cannot get this. Her little body cannot fight this. So we went into hyper, shutdown mode. And Victoria, I was kind of talking with you, I think yesterday about, a week ago was the first time I had a business meeting in person with some people at Emerge. And it was our creative team. And I'll be honest, I was scared to death. Like, I was driving to where I was going. And in my mind, I was like, I have not been in any type of connected relationship like this outside of my wife and my parents who were in our bubble in a year, like not a month.
Yeah. You got flooded, right?
Oh my gosh.
So I flooded fear.
Oh my gosh. I'm driving to where we were meeting. And I saw on my GPS that I was about a minute away, and there was a stop sign, and I literally stopped for about 10 minutes. Unfortunately, I was early, so I had time to do this, but I just stopped and I went through a process in my mind of being able to ground myself, to really walk through some of the irrational fears that were happening in my mind, that, not being in the connected world of being in proximity of people in such a long time. And it was a moment. And the thing is overcoming that and being able to go. And I ended up being in that meeting, for a better part of the day. I left that meeting and I felt really good. Like, there was a jolt of something. It's like, I don't know. It's like maybe having ice cream and then not having it for a year and going, man, that is good.
Like, I really miss that creamy stuff.
Forgot how nice.
I miss eyeballs. I miss eyeballs.
Yeah.
Wow. Eyeballs of other people. And that's a great thing for you to comment on, and the way that you had to walk yourself through it. I've been normalizing that for a lot of individuals. It's almost as if you get decision fatigue a little bit. And because going out and doing something that was once joyful or pleasurable or exciting becomes a source of threat. In polyvagal theory, that's because when we are conserving energy under a threat, under something that could be an act of violence or aggression or fear-based, we have to shut down our mechanism of socialization. So we don't have room, we don't have energy to think about socializing. It's one of the first things our brain disconnects from. And so what so many people have found is the disconnection that we were all feeling. And then on the back end, we almost became used to it, and we became afraid of it or didn't want it. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times, Matt, I would come home from, just being at work, because that's the only thing I did for many, many months. And I didn't want to leave my house because I was paralyzed by having to think my way through going out and maybe going to the store, and what would it entail and what would that mean? And so my brain would just say, nope, don't want to do it, and would just detach and shut down. And I would find myself hunkering down and preparing for something worse.
Yeah. So you and I are both therapists experiencing these things. What are some things that you think would be helpful for listeners? I mean, every person on the planet is experiencing these types of feelings. Like, what are our thoughts? Like, what do we want to communicate to them about this?
I love that you asked that question, and I'm going to toss it back to you because we both have had different experiences. So I re-entered back into daily living outside of, sheltering in. Probably May, June was when I started to return back to work and kind of slowly re-entering. And I'm still in a slow phase of that, where I will see a person or see a group if it is a socially safe situation. However, I've had to do a lot of thinking around everything. What would the restaurant look like if we go to a restaurant? Who will be there? Where has everyone been? I will have to think about my parents. I will think about the mental activity and the mental energy it takes me to kind of do all of the 360 around it. And so because I have almost an anxious disposition, I'll have to talk to my anxiety. I'll have to be able to say, like, okay, calm down. You're okay. These are the things that are in place to create safety for you. This is not safe for you. You don't have to do this. And I have to become aware of my internal dialogue. Some individuals, sometimes I have a little bit of a rebel in me. And so she just wants to be like, oh, forget it. Just go out there. It's no big deal. And then I recognize that that's, again, this part of me that's trying to survive what it thinks is a threat, which is more of that fleeing mechanism or fighting mechanism. So we have to recognize what's getting stirred up inside of us. Fight, flee, shut down. So for you, Matt, what do you think you've struggled most with?
Well, ours is probably definitely flee. I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, when nobody knew anything, I mean, it shot up all of my stuff. Like all of my stuff got activated because it's like, I'm a relatively new dad. My daughter's 3 and has been horribly sick since she's been born. She's been in the hospital more times than I can tell you. And then all of a sudden this world pandemic thing happens. And I'm like, I don't know how to fight this thing. Like, I don't even know what is happening. And certainly in the beginning, we didn't have the information that we have now. And it was like, we were in hazmat suits and, if we're going to the grocery store, just burn your clothes, not even take them off and wash them. So, in that period, I think, we've evolved greatly since then. I mean, those first month or two was like, we're boarding up the windows and whatever else. I mean, I'm being extreme, but you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Now we live, but we're just very smart about it. There's certain things that we're just not willing to do. And, but I think one of the things that I find is acknowledging what my body and what I'm saying, acknowledging that it's okay. Part of the process is for me, not avoiding what my body's telling me. And there are times when I'm working with clients and I'll talk about the stimulus. If the stimulus is a bear that's in front of you, it's okay for your body to respond that way. It's like always looking at going, okay, what am I responding to? And I think a lot of times, like in the moment that I was driving over to the house where we were having that meeting, in that moment, it was like, okay, I'm feeling these things. I want to acknowledge it. I don't want to try to, right. I don't want to hide. I don't want to push it away. I don't want to let this part of me not feel like it's being acknowledged, because this part of me hasn't been in a social circle in a year. So it's like, it's okay that this part of me is going, what are we doing? Like, this is a terrible idea. I think about Inside Out. We watch that movie all the time, and like those little parts that are inside of your head. And now, the green guy who's like the concerned part, like, why are we doing this? That's kind of that part of me that's going, okay, this is crazy. But the thing is I'm able to kind of reconcile with that and have a conversation with that and acknowledge going, thank you for looking out for me. Does that make sense?
Yes, the gratefulness. I teach clients, hello body, hello body, hello mind, hello thought, hello anxiety. I often think about stroking my anxious girl's hair because she really likes her head rubbed. And so I have to think about, that visual aspect of calming her down so that my system can come back online and I can utilize that full brain, that full mind, that full body that God created us to have. And what's fascinating, and I want us to go here because I brought this up to you and you were like, oh, that's so good. Let's talk about how the disciples felt. Can we talk about the upper room? Can we talk about like this awareness the other day I had of how they must have felt? My girl is Mary of Magdalene, so I have this passion for her and she teaches me so much. And I think about how she left before the disciples and she went to the tomb out of obedience, right? She was going to prepare the body of Jesus. And I think about all the grief and the despair and the loss that she must have felt, but her recognition that she needed to move forward and go and do what was necessary and right, even though she was probably overwhelmed with fear, overwhelmed with confusion, and not really understanding what to trust. Because if you think about Mary, she was healed by Jesus. Okay, the demons were cast out of her. She personally knew what it was like to walk with the power of Jesus. Okay. And so could you imagine? She was like sitting at the cross. In her mind, she had to have thought at some point, come on, get off the cross. Like,
absolutely.
And then when he didn't, and then when he was buried, right? So we know that she went to an empty tomb, but she didn't know she was going to an empty tomb.
Sure.
And so I think so much for her. And I think so much about walking in fear and walking in uncertainty and walking in confusion. And I will definitely say I have felt all of those things in this season as I have been re-entering into my life and what it looks like post-COVID. Or really, I wouldn't even say we're at post-COVID yet. I would say we're, in the back end, but definitely not past it.
Yeah. talk to me a little bit more about reentry. I think that key in what you're describing with the disciples, and then also what we're experiencing right now, and Mary Magdalene. Talk to me about reentry, because I think that is a topic that we're going to need to understand.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Let me ask you, Matt.
Yeah.
You've been hunkered in. You've been hunkered down. How is Jesus coming to you? What would be your upper room in your home, in your space? What would be your upper room, the place that you at once found joy and connection with, that now became this place of uncertainty?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing for us is because we are so connected with our church. We have been doing church online until a week ago. And so that reentry was extremely important. But for us, and maybe this is how you feel about it too, Victoria, it's baby steps. It's not jumping into the deep end going, okay, we're now just going to do everything that we did in 2019 in 2021. It's just not the case. But I think for us, it's like, a week ago, my wife and I both went to church, and it was, we didn't stay terribly long. We wore masks the whole time, but that was, for us, it was a baby step into going, okay, here we're gonna re-enter into a place that's extremely important to us. I mean, so much of our connectivity with our community and our friends is surrounded by that. But it wasn't a dive in. Does that make sense?
Well, right. So let's think about Jesus coming to the disciples in the upper room, right? Did he just go there and pull them out immediately?
No.
How long did he hang out with them?
A while. I'm
curious why. What's your interpretation of that?
Because I think that the human brain needs to be able to decompress to some of this stuff. You can't just be like, okay, here's a dead man walking that we saw hung 3 days before, and our human brains don't compute that. That's not, I mean, even today, we know the story. We've read the gospel. My brain still doesn't compute that. So if he were to walk back to me today and I were to be sitting in the upper room, I'd be like, we've got a crazy person up here. Like, everybody get this guy out.
Right.
Or maybe I'm the crazy person. I don't know. Someone's lost their mind here.
That's right. Someone's lost their mind. Well, and think about Thomas, right? Thomas was like, hey, he needed to touch. He needed to experience, right? Christ came to give them peace. The very first thing he did is that peace be with you. Peace be with you. Mm-hmm. So we need that concept of peace, right? We need to know that. And he came and he gave them peace. And then he sat with them. And kind of what happened between him and them is pretty sacred, right? It's not really written a ton about. And so we have to just sit with it and say, do we have an upper room? Do we have a place that was once safe and connective for us? I mean, that's where they shared a meal with him and he washed their feet and he was so tender and loving to them. And so to be able then to be facing some of their hardest reconciliation of fears and overcome that, they needed to have rest. They needed to have time to heal, time to re-enter. They came out blazing, they came out with baptism of the Spirit, but let's not move too quickly into that. Let's spend some time thinking about why they needed rest and their body to heal from the grief and the fear and almost reset so that their purpose could be realigned to what Jesus was calling them to. So I love that. I love how, after death, the way he interacted with both Mary and the disciples is just beautiful.
How would you relate that to what we're experiencing in today's world coming through this past year? Like, help me with some of maybe the correlations in your mind of going, what the disciples are figuring out in that moment and what we're trying to figure out moving through this very strange time.
I think for me, I can't speak for everyone, but I can think for me, I'm a Holocaust buff. And so I really love reading about Jewish history. I love reading about what happened in the Holocaust. And so I think a lot about prisoners of war and those that were enslaved in the concentration camps. And I think about the disconnect that they must have felt. However, there was also this sense of community that those who survived these horrible circumstances will talk about. It's written in so many books from survivors, and they say what kept them alive was a sense of purpose, a sense of community, a sense of knowing that there was something beyond this, belief and hope that there would be life past this. And so I think for me, my upper room was just feeling so fearful of the condition of the world. It wasn't just the pandemic. For us in the States, it also went with just the political unrest and all the topics of the racial issues. Everything was happening for us. My brain felt overwhelmed. It felt like it couldn't process any more information, any more grief, any more disconnect. Yeah. And so what it wanted to do is just hide and hunker down and almost not listen to anything. And I would say on some level that included not listening to God, right? Because you pull away from everything. You become so in tune to your humanness that you can lose your spiritual part. And I think for me, there was a couple of weeks there that I was losing that part of myself because I was just finding myself more and more and more shut down. And so as I began to re-enter, I had to slowly and systemically think about re-engaging my body, re-engaging my mind, re-engaging the world of spirit, re-engaging connection in so many different levels, because it almost became a frightening for me. And so being able to see something now with fresh eyes is important for me. And also to recognize that there's this new passion inside of me that is getting rebirthed and reborn on the other side of this, because it's such a real experience that many of us have had.
Yeah. And, kind of to add to that, when we look at the safety aspect of this, coming through this past year, I'm noticing I have to take some inventory in myself and going, what maladaptive behaviors have developed because of this process? And I think each person's going to have to take some stock in that and going, have I developed perceptions? Have I developed thoughts about a certain type of people? Have I developed thoughts about our community? Whatever it may be, but is it adaptive or is it maladaptive? And is it helping the system or is it hurting the system? And there are definite things that I'm recognizing because of 2020 and now into 2021 that's like, I could very easily, I think I shared with you, I married into, my wife is very much the extrovert in the family, which balances me. But because of 2020, if I hadn't had that balance, I could be in this basement office for the next 25 years and not come out if I had a fridge down here or something, you know what I mean? But those are maladaptive things. And there are times when I find myself going, I know I need to do this, but everything in every fiber in my body says I'm not safe. I don't want to do it. And why expose myself to, whatever, but it's like, it's unhealthy. It's a maladaptive behavior for me to get stuck in that.
Yes. I think we all have developed maladaptive. And some people, it's even to the opposite of that, where there's not accountability or internal connect with choices impacting others. And so, I cannot tell you how many times I've sat in front of families or in front of individuals who families are divided over this, of all the things that we talked about the emotional, political unrest in our current world, and how there's just argument, division, and there's this fighting amongst families and overpowering. And if you think about it again, go back to that connectivity. It's the first thing that goes in your brain, the desire to connect. And so you're not seeing the person in front of you as another human. You're just seeing them as an object or a means to an end or something to overcome or a source of threat. And so we've lost the ability to have the eyeball connection. And I say that a lot, eyeball to eyeball, body to body. And so I think that's why Jesus came and spent time with them in the upper room. He could have done anything. When he reappeared, he could have done anything. He could have called them anywhere. He could have set the stage for anything. Why did he enter into the upper room? Why did he meet them there? And why did he sit with them for as long as he did? I think there's tenderness in there. There's mercy in there. And there's also probably some hard conversations he had to have with them.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of about what you were saying, the maladaptiveness, the thing that I was saying about, just disconnecting and moving in that direction. And so, I just find the tenderness in God calling us forward. Jesus is saying like, okay, we are soon going to be in the next months, whatever months is, the next months, whatever it be, we are going to be as a culture re-engaging in some form of re-entry.
Yeah.
And how will that look? And how will we respond? And how will we respond to others in that?
When trauma happens in a person's life, the fracture happens, a wound happens, and safety's lost in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's through the process of that person trying to reestablish safety.
You got it.
We've got to be very clear about, and that's where a lot of the maladaptive behaviors. And I think Jesus in that moment was being so slow and tender because he recognized if he wasn't, what would that do to the brains of those people in that room of going, you can't create safety in that kind of way. Like if he would have been flashed down and it's like this light and he's an angel and whatever, it's like, you can't wrap your head around that.
Right. Well, right. Look at the disciples who were on the road to Emmaus with him.
Right.
They couldn't even see him. They were blinded by their own grief. They couldn't even see him till he broke the bread. And then they were able to not really so much in his face, but in the action, the compassion. And then they could see him as the embodiment of fully man and fully God. And so I just love that. I think that's where I feel so much connection with Jesus right now, is calling us forward in reentry in a way that preserves safety, because Jesus cares about safety, right? Mm-hmm. And connectivity. Connection is important. Without touch, we don't thrive. We die. Isolation is a form of abuse. It's a form of torture. Too much isolation can really damage the mind and the body on a lot of levels. And so we have to recognize at some point we have to push past that and move into re-entry and re-engagement as we move into a safer world.
Yeah. I mean, we see that in the very beginning of Genesis. When Adam is created, God recognizes, oh, wait a minute. He needs to be in community. He needs to be connected. We need to be connected. There's no question. I mean, being a therapist through this past year has shown me more and more the importance of that, because there were clients that I was working with. We weren't focused on depression. We weren't focused on any of these things. We were focused on other things. And then through this process, all of the sudden, because of the lack of connectivity, we're working on depression problems. That wasn't even part of the treatment plan in 2019. But now, because of the disconnect, all of a sudden there's anxieties that weren't existent. There are depression, and it's because I believe it's so important that we are connected. And I've encouraged all of my clients over this year, we've got to get creative. There are ways to do this, but we've got to be creative in doing that. Be safe, be smart, This isn't to go out and just be, well, we're supposed to be together, so I'm going to go and hang out in a crowd or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But there are ways of doing that to meet those. But there are a lot of clients that I've had that have just reclused. And now 6, 8 months, 10 months later, they're feeling the effects of it. I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks, months of clients going, I've never felt this emotion before. And I'm not motivated. I don't want to do anything. I think there's a lot of that happening.
Right. And I want to leave us with a couple thoughts. I love where this is going, and I think it's gonna, we can't answer everyone's questions today. We're hopefully we've sparked some dialogues in families. Hopefully we've sparked some internal conversations with selves. But I want us to think about too, that it wasn't just the disciples, right? I mean, Jesus, he took on the sins and the suffering of the world. He wasn't a stranger to trauma.
That's right.
His body was traumatized. We cannot overlook the fact that he was fully man and fully God, but his manhood felt the wounds and the pains and the suffering. Mm-hmm. And so when he can show us that there is life beyond, because he conquered death, he overcame death so that he could set us free, so that the spiritual, the emotional, the physical warfare that we're under, wounds that we are experiencing, don't leave us. We will be, as a culture, dealing with post-COVID issues, no different than those who suffered from Holocaust or those who suffered from major life-altering experiences or death. He's coming so that we're not afraid for what is ever on the other side, because whatever is on the other side is intended for redemption, is intended to have a greater purpose than what we can understand. And so that's the hope that I want to share in this message today, is that, Jesus loves the traumatized. Mm-hmm. He is not afraid or fearful or not compassionate towards that part of our lives.
Well, Victoria, I love this concept and I love what we're doing. And today we're really focused on the idea of trauma with connection, safety, reentry. We're going to take another aspect of that, in a couple months from now and do the second episode of Trauma Talk. And we'll get into that at that time. I so appreciate your heart and willingness to kind of go down this road and share your experience and expertise in this. Obviously we have you at Emerge as our trauma center person because of all the things that you've been bringing to the table and teaching all of us. I mean, you've been such a teacher to all of us at Emerge. And I just want to thank you for being a part of this process.
That's great. So I'm going to leave you with a question, right? You always leave someone with the question, but I'm going to leave you with a question.
Am I going to answer the question, or are you just going to ask me the question?
No, I'm going to ask you the question.
But you want me to answer it?
I do. Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
I'm wondering if you were to relate to any aspect of the disciples and the fear that they faced. Is there any aspect of that story that you connect to most and you feel inspired by most?
And that's a really good question. I think that when you ask the question, and this is probably me just being as human as possible.
Yeah, I love it.
And I want to be as honest and human, because we live in such a world where it's prove it to me. Probably Thomas in the moment of going, I want to see proof of that, because it seems so supernatural to me in a world that follows so many rules, but here's the thing though. I didn't get to walk in Thomas's shoes and see the things that Jesus did. It's like, I think, like you had talked about earlier, some of the things that, he did with Mary Magdalene and delivered her from, all of the things that she was experiencing with that to me. And then seeing him resurrect, I would hope, this is just my hope, that I'd be like, yeah, of course he resurrected himself. He's Jesus. But there's a part of me in there going, yeah, I want to see it. let me see the nail holes. I don't know. That's kind of what initially came to my head.
I love that we're leaving your listeners with that concept of you. That's great.
Right. Probably not the greatest.
I would validate there's an inner Thomas in you, and that's not a negative thing.
Yeah. What about you? I've got to ask you the same question. What would be your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to spending time in the presence of Jesus in such a tender way. I love how you shared how their brains were like overwhelmed by seeing him. They probably at first were like, doubting their own sense of perception, doubting their own internal sense of what they experienced, and then having to go through all of the processing of, is this really him? Is this real in front of us? And then really hunkering down, rolling up my sleeves, and spending some quiet, intimate, undocumented time with Jesus, who just overcame death. Undocumented time, right? It's kind of hidden behind the door for a reason. So I'm gonna sit on that. What's our undocumented hidden time with Jesus like? In the midst of all of this? Yeah.
Really good. Victoria, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for asking me questions. This is fun. I like the it's not so much an interview. This is good.
God bless. Shalom.
Safety and reentry. Whether it is coming out of 2020 or a trauma from childhood, reestablishing safety is paramount. Then figuring out reentry is step 2 in that equation. If you have more questions about this or any other topics we cover on the program, please check emerge.org for more info. We have a trauma landing page that we will be building resources, blogs, and other links that you might find helpful. Well, this is a wrap on our first episode of Trauma Talk. I want to thank Victoria for being such a huge part of this process. Thank you for listening. Please give us a like, a share, or a comment if you have the time. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.